They say a mother's love is unconditional. They never warn you that sometimes your child's love comes with an expiration date. My name is Diana, and I'm 55 years old. For 32 years, I believed I was building something sacred, a bond between mother and daughter that would withstand anything life threw at us. I changed diapers at 3 in the morning, worked double shifts to afford dance lessons, sat through countless school plays where she had 2 lines but shone like the sun itself. I held her through heartbreaks, celebrated her victories as if they were my own, and made sacrifices so quietly that even I forgot to count them. I thought love was a language we both spoke fluently. I was wrong. If you enjoy stories that touch the heart and make you feel something real, please subscribe to our channel. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us. And leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. It helps us know we're not alone in this. The first time I noticed the shift, I told myself I was imagining things. It was small, so small that acknowledging it felt like admitting to paranoia. Sarah had always called me on Sundays. Always. It was our ritual, our sacred hour where she would tell me about her week, her husband Mark, her job at the marketing firm downtown. I would listen, offer advice when asked, laugh at her stories, and feel, for that brief moment, like I still mattered in her busy, successful life. But then the calls started coming later, then every other week, then monthly, then silence punctuated by brief text messages that read like corporate emails. Busy week, Mom. Talk soon. Soon never came. I remember the exact moment my heart first whispered that something was terribly wrong. It was my birthday, my 54th. I had set the table for 2, made her favorite lemon cake from scratch, the one I'd been baking since she was 7 years old. The recipe was worn and stained, evidence of decades of tradition. I had even bought real lemons, the expensive organic ones, because Sarah always said they tasted brighter. 6 o'clock came and went, then 7. At 8:30, my phone buzzed. Not a call, but a text. Sorry, Mom. Got caught up at work. Can't make it. Happy birthday. No cake. No hug. No explanation that felt like it came from a daughter who remembered being rocked to sleep in these same arms that now trembled as they held the phone. I ate a slice of cake alone that night, each bite tasting like dust and broken promises. The rest went into the trash the next morning. I couldn't bear to look at it, but I told myself to be patient. She was building her career, building her marriage, building her life. Wasn't that what I had raised her to do? Be independent? Be strong? Be successful? Maybe this was just a phase, a temporary distance that comes when children spread their wings. The headaches started around that time. At first, they were manageable, just a dull throb at the base of my skull that aspirin could silence. But they grew stronger, more persistent, accompanied by dizzy spells that made the world tilt sideways without warning. I ignored them for months, the way you ignore a check engine light, hoping it will resolve itself. When I finally went to the doctor, driven there by a spell so severe I nearly collapsed at the grocery store, the diagnosis came wrapped in clinical terminology that couldn't hide its severity. A neurological condition, progressive, requiring treatment, monitoring, and, most importantly, support. I called Sarah that evening, my hands shaking as I dialed. For the first time in months, she answered on the second ring. Mom? What's wrong? You never call this late. The fact that she found my call unusual, that my voice on the phone was now an anomaly rather than a comfort, should have warned me. But I was desperate for connection, desperate to believe that surely this news would bring her back to me. Sarah, sweetheart, I need to talk to you. I went to the doctor today and, Mom, I'm actually in the middle of something. Can this wait until tomorrow? It's important, honey. I really need... Tomorrow, Mom. I promise. I have to go. The line went dead, and I sat there staring at my phone, wondering when exactly I had become an interruption in my daughter's life instead of a priority. Tomorrow came, but her call didn't. When I finally reached her 3 days later, her response was measured, distant, like she was reading from a script prepared for difficult clients. That sounds serious, Mom. Have you looked into treatment options? I can send you some links to websites. Websites. As if what I needed was information rather than her hand in mine, her presence beside me, her voice telling me that everything would be okay. "I was hoping you might come with me to the next appointment," I ventured, hating how small my voice sounded, how much like begging. There was a pause. Too long, too calculated. "I'll check my schedule and get back to you." She never did. The months that followed taught me a new kind of loneliness. It's one thing to be alone. It's another to be surrounded by memories of love that apparently meant more to you than to the person who inspired them. Every corner of my small house whispered Sarah's name, the growth chart still penciled on the kitchen doorframe, marking her journey from 3 feet tall to 5'6". The photos covering the hallway wall, her first day of school, her graduation, her wedding day where I stood beside her, so proud I could barely breathe. Had she looked at me that day and seen a mother who loved her? Or had she already started seeing me as I feared she saw me now, a burden waiting to happen, an obligation she'd one day need to shed? The treatments began. The medication made me nauseous, tired, my hands trembling so badly some mornings I could barely button my own shirt. I learned to live with the dizzy spells, the moments when the world would blur and tilt, when I'd have to grip the counter and wait for reality to settle back into place. I learned to be sick alone. Sarah sent care packages, impersonal collections of herbal teas and vitamin supplements ordered online and delivered to my doorstep with cards signed by a printing company, not her hand. "Thinking of you, Mom." But she wasn't, not really. You don't think of someone and then refuse to see them for months. You don't think of someone and dodge their calls. You don't think of someone and treat their medical appointments like inconvenient scheduling conflicts. I started going to treatments alone, sitting in waiting rooms surrounded by other patients who had family members holding their hands, asking questions, taking notes. I pretended to read magazines, but really, I was watching them, these normal families doing what families are supposed to do. Once, a kind nurse asked, "Is someone coming to drive you home? These medications can make you drowsy." "My daughter," I lied, because the truth, that I would take a taxi back to an empty house, felt too pathetic to speak aloud. "She's just running a bit late." I waited an hour after my appointment ended, sitting in the hospital lobby so the nurse wouldn't see me leaving alone. When I finally called the taxi, I cried the entire ride home. The driver pretended not to notice. The last time I saw Sarah before everything changed was Thanksgiving. She had invited me, reluctantly, I could tell from her tone, saying Mark's mother couldn't make it this year and they had an extra seat. An extra seat. As if I was a last-minute guest being squeezed in, rather than the woman who had spent 32 Thanksgivings making sure she had everything she needed. I arrived at their beautiful suburban home, the kind of house I had dreamed of giving her but never could afford. She greeted me at the door with a brief hug that felt like a transaction, something to be completed and checked off a list. "You're early," she said, though I had arrived exactly when she'd told me to. Mark was polite, but distant. The way you are with acquaintances you're obligated to entertain. Their home was perfect. Magazine perfect, with its modern furniture and abstract art, its kitchen island larger than my entire kitchen. This was the life she had built, the life that apparently had no room for the woman who had built her. Dinner was painful. They talked about their vacation plans, their home renovation ideas, their friends I'd never met and never would. When I tried to join the conversation, to share something about my own life, Sarah would nod politely and then steer the discussion back to her world, as if my existence was a brief interruption to be tolerated and then dismissed. I asked about Christmas plans. Her face tightened almost imperceptibly. "We're thinking of doing something different this year, Mom. Maybe a trip, just the two of us. You understand, right?" I nodded, because what else could I do? Create a scene? Beg for inclusion in my own daughter's life? I had already lost so much dignity. I couldn't bear to lose what little remained. As I left that night, Sarah walked me to the door. For a moment, just a brief, shimmering moment, I thought I saw something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or regret. I waited for her to say something, to acknowledge that we had lost something precious, to suggest we find our way back to each other. Instead, she said, "Drive safe, Mom. The roads get icy this time of year." That was it. Weather small talk. From the daughter I had given everything to, I received a warning about road conditions. I drove home through tears that made the streetlights blur into starbursts of lonely light, and I knew, with the certainty of a mother's breaking heart, that I was losing her, had already lost her, was mourning someone who was still alive but no longer mine. They say distance makes the heart grow fonder. They don't tell you that sometimes distance just makes it easier to forget. Winter came early that year, coating everything in a layer of ice that made the world look beautiful and treacherous at the same time. Much like my relationship with Sarah, still gleaming on the surface, but one wrong step and you'd find yourself falling, breaking, shattering into pieces too small to put back together. I tried, God knows I tried, to bridge the gap that had opened between us. I would call and leave voicemails that tried to sound cheerful, unburdened, the kind of mother who didn't need anything from her daughter except the pleasure of her company. Just checking in, sweetheart. No need to call back if you're busy. Love you. But the silence that followed each message felt heavier than the words themselves. Days would pass, then a text would arrive. Sorry, crazy week. Talk soon. Soon was becoming a country I'd never get to visit. A promise that existed only to be broken. I started noticing something that hurt more than the absence. When Sarah did answer my calls, I could hear it in her voice. That slight edge of impatience, the way her words came faster, clipped, as if she was already planning her escape from the conversation before it had truly begun. I had become a task on her to-do list, something to be completed quickly so she could move on to more important matters. One February afternoon, I called with news I thought she'd want to hear. My doctor had found a new treatment protocol, one that showed promise for my condition. It meant more appointments? Yes. But also hope, real, tangible hope that I might stabilize, that I might not deteriorate as quickly as we'd feared. That's great, Mom, Sarah said, but her voice was flat, distracted. I could hear typing in the background. She was working while we talked, multitasking even this moment that felt so significant to me. The doctor said I should bring someone to the consultation, I ventured, hating how my voice had taken on a pleading quality I couldn't quite suppress. To help understand the treatment plan, in case what, Mom? Her tone had sharpened, irritation bleeding through the careful politeness. In case you can't remember? You're not that sick yet. Yet. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade, waiting to drop, yet implied a future where I would be that sick, and her tone suggested she was already preparing for it, not with compassion, but with resignation, maybe even resentment. I just thought it would be nice to have company, I said quietly. Mom, I can't just drop everything every time you have a doctor's appointment. I have responsibilities, a career. Mark and I are trying to... She stopped abruptly, and in that silence, I heard something shift. Trying to what? I asked. Nothing. Never mind. Look, I really have to go. Email me the details, and I'll see what I can do. She never saw what she could do. The email I sent went unanswered. Just another message floating in the digital void between us. But it was her birthday that truly opened my eyes to how far I had fallen in her estimation. I had planned for weeks, saving money I could barely afford to spare. I bought her a necklace. Nothing extravagant, but meaningful. A silver pendant with 2 intertwined circles, mother and daughter, forever connected. The kind of sentimental gift that meant something only if the sentiment was reciprocated. I drove to her house, unannounced because every attempt to schedule a visit had been deflected or delayed. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I told myself that surely she'd be home, that surely surprising her with a birthday gift would bring back some of the warmth we'd lost. Mark answered the door, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked uncomfortably like pity when he saw me standing there with my wrapped gift and hopeful smile. Diana, he said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. We weren't expecting you. I know, I should have called, but it's Sarah's birthday and I wanted to... She's not here. He glanced back into the house, uncomfortable. She's at a spa day, with some friends from work. Girls' day thing. A spa day. On her birthday. With friends, not with me. The gift felt suddenly heavy in my hands, the wrapping paper I'd chosen so carefully now seeming childish, desperate. Oh, I managed. I didn't realize. Could you give this to her? He took the package with the reluctance of someone accepting an obligation they didn't want. Sure, I'll make sure she gets it. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. Diana, wait. When I looked back, his face had softened slightly. Look, she's going through some things right now. It's not personal. Not personal. How could a daughter's rejection of her mother be anything but personal? What things? I asked, something desperate rising in my chest. Mark, please. If something's wrong, I want to help. I'm her mother. He shook his head, already regretting saying anything. It's not my place. You should talk to Sarah. But Sarah wouldn't talk to me. She sent a brief thank you text 3 days later. Thanks for the necklace, Mom. It's nice. Nice. 3 decades of love, 3 weeks of careful shopping, 3 days of waiting for acknowledgement, all reduced to nice. I never saw her wear it. The real fracture, the one that should have prepared me for what was coming but somehow still blindsided me, happened at Easter. Sarah had invited me to dinner. Actually invited me, not just tolerated my request to visit. I should have known something was wrong. Since when did she seek out my company? I arrived with an Easter basket for her, because old habits die hard, and mothers never really stop seeing their children as the little ones who once believed in egg-hunting bunnies and chocolate miracles. Sarah opened the door, and I immediately noticed she'd had her hair done, highlights that must have cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. She looked beautiful, successful, everything I'd always hoped she'd become. Mom, you didn't have to bring anything, she said, taking the basket with barely a glance. Inside, the dining room table was set for 4. My stomach dropped. She hadn't mentioned other guests. I hope you don't mind, Sarah said, her voice carrying that too bright quality that signaled carefully rehearsed explanations. Mark's sister and her husband are joining us. You remember Vanessa, right? I remembered Vanessa. 28. Childless by choice. Successful in tech. The kind of woman who spoke in acronyms and considered family obligations quaint relics of a bygone era. I had met her twice before, and both times she had looked at me the way people look at outdated furniture, something that once served a purpose but now just takes up space. Dinner was excruciating. Vanessa dominated the conversation with stories about her latest promotion, her recent trip to Thailand, her new Tesla. Mark and Sarah engaged enthusiastically, asking questions, laughing at her observations about how traditional life paths were becoming obsolete. I sat there, cutting my ham into smaller and smaller pieces, occasionally attempting to contribute only to have my words drift away unacknowledged, like smoke dissipating in wind. At one point, Vanessa turned to me with what she probably thought was polite interest. So, Diana, Sarah mentioned you've been having some health issues. Nothing too serious, I hope. The table went quiet. Sarah's face flushed slightly, but whether from embarrassment at my condition or at Vanessa's tactlessness, I couldn't tell. I'm managing, I said carefully, looking at Sarah, hoping she might elaborate, might show these people that her mother's illness mattered to her. Instead, Sarah stood abruptly. Anyone want more wine? She disappeared into the kitchen without waiting for responses. Vanessa filled the awkward silence. Well, you know what they say. Getting older isn't for the faint of heart. She laughed at her own joke, and Mark joined in politely. I sat there, my health condition, the thing that frightened me most, that kept me awake at night wondering what my future held, reduced to a punchline about aging. When Sarah returned with wine bottles, she refilled everyone's glass except mine. You shouldn't drink with your medications, right, Mom? She said, her tone suggesting she was doing me a favor rather than excluding me from even this small social ritual. After dinner, while Mark and Vanessa discussed their upcoming golf weekend, Sarah asked me to help her in the kitchen. I followed her, hopeful that perhaps she wanted a private moment with her mother, a chance to connect away from the others. She handed me a dish towel. You can dry while I wash. We worked in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the running water and the clink of dishes. Finally, I couldn't bear it anymore. Sarah, sweetheart, is everything okay? Between us, I mean. I feel like, everything's fine, Mom. Her voice was tight, controlled. Why wouldn't it be? It's just, we used to be so close. And now I barely hear from you, and when I do see you, it feels like you can't wait for me to leave. She scrubbed at a plate with unnecessary force. That's not true. You're being dramatic. Am I? The words came out sharper than I intended. You forgot my birthday. You avoid my calls. You invite me to dinner and then ignore me the entire evening. I didn't forget your birthday, she said defensively. I texted you. A text, Sarah. You sent a text. She slammed the plate into the drying rack with enough force that I was surprised it didn't break. What do you want from me, Mom? I have a life. I have responsibilities. I can't drop everything just because you're feeling lonely. The words hit like physical blows. Lonely. As if my need for my daughter's love was some kind of character flaw, a weakness to be ashamed of. I'm not asking you to drop everything, I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm just asking you to care, to be my daughter. I am your daughter, she snapped. But I'm also an adult with my own life. Maybe it's time you found your own life instead of making me responsible for your happiness. The dish towel slipped from my hands. Is that what you think? That I'm trying to make you responsible for my happiness? Aren't you? She turned to face me fully now, and in her eyes, I saw something that broke my heart even more than her words. I saw resentment. Deep, festering resentment that had probably been building for years while I remained blissfully ignorant. Every call is about how you're feeling, what you need, your appointments, your problems. It's exhausting, Mom. I have a neurological condition, I whispered. I'm scared. And that's horrible, I get it. But it's not my fault, and it's not my responsibility to fix it. From the dining room, I heard Vanessa's laugh, bright and carefree. Mark called out, "Everything okay in there?" "Fine," Sarah called back, her tone instantly transforming to cheerful brightness. Then, lower to me, "Look, I think maybe you should go. This obviously isn't a good time." I wanted to argue, to make her see that she was breaking my heart, that I needed her now more than ever. But the look on her face, closed, defensive, desperate for me to leave, stopped the words in my throat. I gathered my coat and purse while Sarah made excuses to Mark and Vanessa about me not feeling well. She walked me to the door, her hand on my elbow guiding me out with the efficiency of someone removing an unwanted guest. "Drive carefully," she said, already closing the door before I'd fully stepped onto the porch. I stood there in the spring darkness, listening to the sound of laughter resuming inside the house, the party continuing without missing a beat now that the burden had been removed. The drive home was a blur of tears and streetlights. I kept replaying her words. It's not my responsibility to fix it. When had loving your mother become something that needed fixing? When had I transformed from the woman who had given her everything into a problem she needed to solve, an obligation she resented? That night, alone in my house, I looked at photos of Sarah as a baby, a toddler, a teenager. I remembered holding her for the first time, that overwhelming wave of love that had convinced me I would do anything, sacrifice anything, for this tiny human. I remembered teaching her to read, to ride a bike, to be kind and strong and independent. Had I done too good a job? Had I taught her to be so independent that she no longer needed the woman who had made that independence possible? Or had I simply failed to teach her that love shouldn't come with an expiration date? The phone rang around midnight. For a desperate moment, I thought it might be Sarah, calling to apologize, to take back the cruel words, to tell me she didn't mean any of it. It was Mark. "Diana, I'm sorry about tonight. Sarah's under a lot of stress at work and—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't make excuses for her. We both know this isn't about work stress." He was quiet for a moment. "She's scared," he said finally, "of your illness, of what it might mean, of having to take care of me." I finished for him, of being burdened with a sick mother. He didn't deny it. That silence told me everything I needed to know. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness and understood, with terrible clarity, that I was losing my daughter not to distance or time or natural growing apart. I was losing her to fear and selfishness, and the cruel calculation that I had become more trouble than I was worth. The bond we'd shared, the one I thought was unbreakable, was breaking, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. There's a special kind of pain that comes from watching yourself disappear from someone's life while you're still standing right in front of them. The weeks following Easter brought a new understanding. I wasn't just being pushed away, I was being erased. Sarah stopped answering my calls altogether. My texts went from read to ignored. The digital silence was so complete that I started checking my phone to make sure it was working, sending test messages to my own number just to confirm that yes, the device functioned perfectly. The problem wasn't technology. The problem was that my daughter had decided I no longer deserved a response. I tried to give her space, tried to convince myself that maybe Mark was right, that she needed time to process her fears about my illness. But mothers don't have the luxury of patience when their children are slipping away. Every day without contact felt like watching a photograph fade in sunlight, the image growing dimmer and dimmer until you can barely remember what it used to look like. My condition was worsening. The dizzy spells came more frequently now, and some mornings I would wake up with my hands trembling so badly I couldn't hold a coffee cup without spilling. The medication helped, but it made me foggy, disconnected, like I was living my life from behind a thick pane of glass. I needed help, not constantly, not dramatically, but in those small ways that make aging with illness bearable instead of terrifying. I needed someone to drive me to the neurologist when they adjusted my dosage and warned I shouldn't operate a vehicle. I needed someone to help me organize my medications, to remember which pills to take when, because my memory was becoming unreliable in ways that frightened me more than the physical symptoms. I needed someone to simply sit with me during the bad days, when the world tilted sideways and I had to lie perfectly still until my brain decided to cooperate with reality again. I needed my daughter, but she had made it clear I no longer had the right to need her. In May, I fell. Nothing dramatic. I simply stood up too quickly. The room spun, and I found myself on the kitchen floor with a gash on my forehead from catching the corner of the counter on my way down. Blood ran down my face, warm and terrifying, and I lay there for a moment, stunned by both the physical pain and the crushing realization of how alone I truly was. No one was coming to check on me. No one would notice if I didn't answer my phone, because no one called anymore. I could lie here for hours, days maybe, before anyone discovered me. I managed to get up, to clean the wound, to determine it wasn't serious enough for the emergency room I couldn't afford anyway. But as I stood at the bathroom mirror, pressing a cloth against my bleeding forehead, I saw something in my reflection that made my chest tighten. I looked old. Not just older, but old in the way that speaks of invisible suffering, of battles fought alone, of dignity slowly bleeding out with no one there to help you hold it in. I took a photo of myself, trembling hands, bloody cloth, exhausted eyes, and sent it to Sarah with a simple message. I fell. I'm okay, but I'm scared. Please call me. The message showed as read within minutes, but no call came. No text asking if I needed help. Nothing. Hours later, late into the evening, my phone buzzed. Hope surged through me, pathetic and desperate. But it was just a text. Mom, you need to be more careful. Maybe it's time to think about getting one of those medical alert systems. There are brochures online. A medical alert system. So when I fell, a stranger in a call center somewhere could send an ambulance full of other strangers to help me. Because my own daughter couldn't be bothered. I didn't respond. What was there to say? The final blow. The moment that should have prepared me for the cruelty to come but somehow still shattered me, happened at what should have been a moment of joy. Sarah called me in June, and my heart leaped at seeing her name on my screen. I answered so quickly I nearly dropped the phone. Mom, she said, and there was something in her voice. Excitement, nervousness, something that made me think maybe, finally, we were about to find our way back to each other. Sarah, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called. I've missed... Mom, I'm pregnant. The world stopped. My daughter was going to have a baby. I was going to be a grandmother. Joy and pain crashed together in my chest with such force I couldn't breathe. This should have been a moment of pure happiness, a new beginning, a reason for us to be close again. Oh, Sarah, I whispered, tears already streaming down my face. That's wonderful. That's so wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you. Thanks. Her voice was careful, controlled. We just found out. We're not telling many people yet, but I thought you should know. When? When are you due? January. Look, Mom, there's something else I need to talk to you about. The warmth that had briefly entered her voice evaporated. About the baby. Of course, anything. Do you need help with the nursery? I could... No, Mom, that's not... She sighed, the sound carrying frustration and something else. Something that made my blood run cold. Mark and I have been talking, and with the baby coming, we need to think about our future. Our family's future. Our family. The way she said it made clear that our didn't include me. We think it's best if you give us some space. For a while. Until after the baby's born at least. We need to focus on preparing, and with your health issues, we don't have the bandwidth to deal with that right now. Deal with. As if I was a problem to be managed, a complication to be eliminated. You're asking me to stay away? My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else. From my own grandchild? It's not forever, Mom. Just until we get settled. Babies are stressful, and we need to focus on— I raised you, I interrupted, something breaking open inside me. I raised you alone after your father left. I know about stress. I know about doing it without help. And I never, not once, asked anyone to give me space or leave me alone. I figured it out because that's what mothers do. That was your choice, Sarah said, her voice going cold. You chose to have me, chose to raise me that way. I didn't ask you to sacrifice everything. I didn't ask you to make me responsible for validating those choices. The cruelty of it, the calculated, deliberate cruelty, took my breath away. Every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd deferred, every piece of myself I'd given away to ensure she had everything she needed, reduced to choices she hadn't asked for, burdens she refused to honor. Sarah, please, I'm going to be this baby's grandmother. You can't just— I can, Mom, and I am. Mark agrees with me. We need boundaries, and you need to respect them. No visits until we say so. No dropping by. No guilt trips. She paused. I have to go. Doctor's appointment. I'll call you when the baby's born. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in my hand, trying to process what had just happened. My daughter was having a baby, my grandchild, and I was being banished from that joy like I was some kind of threat. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because my illness, my needs, my very existence had become inconvenient. The months that followed were a special kind of torture. I would see babies everywhere, in grocery stores, in parks, in the doctor's waiting room, and each one felt like a reminder of what I was being denied. I imagined Sarah growing round with pregnancy, Mark doting on her, the nursery being prepared with care and excitement, and I imagined myself absent from it all, erased from the story that should have included me. I tried to respect her boundaries. God, I tried. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up at her door. But I thought about her constantly. Was she feeling well? Was the pregnancy progressing normally? Was she scared? Excited? Did she think of me at all? Or had I become so thoroughly deleted from her life that even her baby wouldn't know I existed? In November, I saw Sarah at the grocery store. She was very pregnant now, 7 months at least, her belly round and full of the life I would never get to know. She was in the produce section, carefully selecting apples, and for a moment, I just watched her, drinking in the sight of my daughter like a woman dying of thirst. She looked up and saw me. Our eyes met across a display of autumn vegetables, and I saw her face register recognition, then something else. Annoyance? Fear? As if running into her own mother was some kind of violation. I couldn't help myself. I approached her, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. Sarah, I said softly, you look beautiful. She glanced around as if checking for witnesses. Mom, what are you doing here? Shopping. I live here, remember? I tried to smile. How are you feeling? Is everything okay with the baby? Everything's fine. She moved to step around me, but I blocked her path, gently, desperately. Please, Sarah, just talk to me for a minute. I miss you so much. I just want to know you're okay. I asked you to give me space, she said, her voice low but sharp. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't respect simple boundaries. Boundaries? The word came out louder than I intended, drawing looks from other shoppers. I'm your mother. I just want to know about my grandchild. Your grandchild? Her laugh was bitter. You think because you're biologically related, you have some automatic right to be involved? I think because I spent 32 years loving you, caring for you, being there for you. I've earned the right not to be thrown away like garbage when I'm no longer useful. The words hung between us, raw and terrible. Sarah's face flushed red. You're making a scene, she hissed. This is exactly why we need distance. You're suffocating, Mom. Everything is always about you, your feelings, your needs. Did it ever occur to you that maybe I need a life that isn't consumed by your constant neediness? Each word was a knife, precisely placed to cause maximum damage. I have a neurological condition, I said, my voice breaking. I'm sick, Sarah. I'm your mother. And I'm sick and I'm alone. And I just wanted a medical alert system, she interrupted. I told you. There are solutions that don't involve making your illness my responsibility. She looked down at her pregnant belly, her hand protective over it. I have to focus on my baby now, my child, the one I'm choosing to protect from unhealthy dynamics. Unhealthy dynamics? I was crying now, not caring who saw. I loved you. I gave you everything. How is that unhealthy? Because you gave me everything and then expected me to spend my life repaying the debt, she said. And there was something in her eyes now that looked almost like pity. I'm sorry you're sick, Mom. I really am. But I can't fix you. And I can't let you bring that energy into my child's life. She walked away, leaving me standing there in the produce section, tears streaming down my face, other shoppers pretending not to stare at the crazy old woman crying over the apples. I drove home in a daze, her words echoing in my head. Debt. Unhealthy dynamics. That energy. When had my love become toxic? When had being someone's mother become a crime punishable by exile? That night, I looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. I saw what Sarah must see. A woman worn down by illness and loneliness. A burden. A problem. Someone whose very existence demanded things her daughter wasn't willing to give. And for the first time, I wondered if she was right. Maybe I was asking too much. Maybe love wasn't supposed to require anything in return. Maybe I had failed at the fundamental task of motherhood, raising a child who wanted me around. The thought was devastating. But what was even more devastating was the small, terrible voice in my head that whispered, maybe I deserve this. Maybe I wasn't enough, and this is my punishment for falling short. I went to bed that night feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. And somewhere across town, my daughter went home to her husband and her unborn child, and probably didn't think of me at all. December came with the kind of cold that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. Or maybe it was just me. Maybe the chill I felt had nothing to do with winter and everything to do with the ice that had formed around my heart, protecting it from feeling anything at all. I had stopped trying. That's what defeat looks like, I realized. Not dramatic collapse, not tears and screaming, just stopping. I stopped calling Sarah, stopped texting, stopped imagining reconciliation scenarios where she'd realize what she'd lost and come running back to me with apologies and explanations that made sense of the senseless. My days became smaller, quieter, like I was slowly shrinking into myself. I took my medications at the right times because the routine gave me something to do, not because I particularly cared about managing my condition anymore. I ate because my body demanded it, not because food held any pleasure. I existed, but I wouldn't call it living. The dizzy spells were worse now. Some days I couldn't get out of bed without the room spinning so violently I had to crawl to the bathroom. My hands shook constantly, making simple tasks like buttoning my shirt or writing a check an exhausting exercise in frustration. The neurologist had warned me this might happen, that stress could accelerate the progression of my condition. Funny how being abandoned by your only child qualified as stress. I spent a lot of time looking at old photographs, not the happy ones from Sarah's childhood that I'd tortured myself with before, but the ones from my own youth, pictures of the girl I used to be, before marriage, before motherhood, before I'd poured myself so completely into another human being that when she left, she took all the essential parts of me with her. Who was that girl in the photographs? She looked fearless, standing there in her bell-bottom jeans and peasant blouse, smiling at a camera held by someone whose name I could no longer remember. She had dreams once, vague, uncertain dreams about traveling, maybe writing, doing something that mattered in ways that had nothing to do with raising the perfect child. I had abandoned that girl the day I became pregnant with Sarah, willingly, joyfully even. I had thought it was a trade worth making. My individual dreams for the larger dream of creating a human being who would love me forever, who would make all those sacrifices meaningful. What a fool I'd been. Christmas approached like a funeral I was obligated to attend. The house was silent. No tree, no decorations. No point in celebrating when you're celebrating alone. I thought about my grandchild, due in January, just weeks away now. I imagined Sarah and Mark decorating a nursery I'd never see, choosing tiny clothes I'd never get to coo over, preparing for a life that had no space for me in it. The grief was physical. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my chest so tight I was sure I was having a heart attack, only to realize it was just my body trying to process a loss it couldn't comprehend. How do you grieve someone who's still alive? How do you mourn a relationship that ended not with death, but with deliberate rejection? On Christmas Eve, I did something I'd sworn I wouldn't do. I drove past Sarah's house. I told myself I just wanted to see it, just wanted to glimpse the lights and maybe, from a distance, imagine the warmth inside. I wasn't going to stop, wasn't going to knock on the door or make any demands. I just needed to see it. The house was beautiful. White lights wrapped around the porch railings, a wreath on the door, a Christmas tree visible through the front window, ornaments glittering like promises of joy I'd never share. Cars filled the driveway, Mark's family probably, gathered for the holiday celebration I wasn't invited to. I sat in my car across the street, engine running for warmth, watching shadows move past the windows. I saw Sarah once, her pregnant silhouette unmistakable, moving through what must have been the living room. She was laughing. I could tell by the way her shoulders shook, by the tilt of her head that I'd memorized over 32 years of loving her. She was happy. Without me, she was happy. That hurt worse than all the cruel words, all the deliberate exclusions, all the ignored messages. She didn't need me. She'd cut me out of her life like a tumor, and instead of suffering from the loss, she'd thrived. I was the only one drowning in grief while she sailed forward, unencumbered by the dead weight of a mother who'd committed the unforgivable sin of needing her. I drove home through empty streets, past houses filled with families, past churches where midnight services promised hope and redemption that felt like fairy tales told to children who still believed the world was fair. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten countless lonely meals, where I'd paid bills I could barely afford, where I'd wrapped Sarah's childhood birthday presents with hands that now trembled too much to handle scissors, and I wrote a letter. Not to Sarah. What would be the point? She'd made clear she didn't want to hear from me, that my words were burdens she refused to carry. No, I wrote to the grandchild I would never know, the baby who would grow up hearing stories about a grandmother who didn't exist, or worse, who existed only as a cautionary tale about unhealthy dynamics and inappropriate neediness. Dear little one, I wrote, my shaking handwriting barely legible. I'm sorry I won't be there to love you. Not because I don't want to be. I want it more than I've wanted anything in years. But your mother has decided I'm not good enough, not healthy enough, not worthy enough to be part of your life. Maybe she's right. Maybe I would have been a burden to you the way I apparently was to her. But I want you to know that I loved you before I ever met you. I love the idea of you, the promise of you, the miracle of you. And I'm sorry, so deeply sorry, that my love wasn't enough to earn me a place in your world. I folded the letter and put it in an envelope, though I had no idea what to do with it. Mail it and risk Sarah's fury? Keep it and let it gather dust with all the other relics of my failed motherhood? In the end, I did nothing. The letter sat on my kitchen table like a headstone marking the death of hope. The days after Christmas blurred together. I stopped checking my phone obsessively, stopped jumping at every notification thinking maybe this would be the one where Sarah reached out. I stopped imagining tearful reunions and explanations that made sense of the senseless. I just stopped. The new year arrived without fanfare. I stayed home while the world celebrated, while fireworks lit up skies I couldn't see from my bedroom where I lay in the dark, too tired and too defeated to even pretend I cared about fresh starts and new beginnings. January came, and with it, the knowledge that somewhere in this city, my daughter was giving birth. I didn't know exactly when. She hadn't told me the due date, and I'd been too proud or too broken to ask during our last awful encounter. But I knew it was soon. Any day now, I would become a grandmother to a child I'd never hold. I imagined her in labor, Mark holding her hand, doctors and nurses surrounding her with care and attention. I imagined the first cry, the first moment she held her baby, the overwhelming rush of love that would consume her the way it had consumed me 32 years ago when I'd first held her. Would she think of me in that moment? Would she remember that I'd gone through the same experience, that I'd brought her into this world with the same hopes and dreams she now held for her own child? Or had she erased me so completely that even in that moment of becoming a mother herself, I would remain invisible? I told myself I didn't care anymore. I told myself I'd grieved enough, that I'd reached the bottom of this particular well of sorrow, and found it had a floor after all. I told myself I was done hoping for crumbs from a table where I'd never again be welcome. But late at night, when sleep refused to come and my body ached with the combined weight of illness and heartbreak, I couldn't help but wonder, how much more could I lose before there was nothing left of me at all? The answer came on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-January, when my phone rang with Sarah's name on the screen. My heart stuttered. This was it, the call announcing the birth, maybe even an invitation to meet my grandchild. Perhaps she'd softened in the transformative experience of becoming a mother herself. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sarah? Mom." Her voice was flat, exhausted, but underneath I heard something else. Determination. The tone of someone who'd made a decision and was now executing it. "I need to talk to you." "Of course, sweetheart. Are you okay? Did you—" "I had the baby. A girl. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. She's healthy." "A granddaughter." I had a granddaughter. The words should have brought joy, but Sarah's tone warned me that joy wasn't why she was calling. "Oh, Sarah, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. What's her name?" "Emma." "We named her Emma." A pause. "Mom, there's something we need to discuss. Mark and I have been talking, and we've made a decision about our family's future." There it was again. Our family. The exclusive pronoun that made clear I wasn't included in that definition. "We think it's best if you don't try to contact us anymore. At all. No calls, no texts, no letters. We need a clean break so we can focus on raising Emma without complications." The world tilted, and for once it wasn't my neurological condition. This was different. This was the ground disappearing beneath my feet, leaving me falling through space with nothing to grab onto. You're cutting me off completely? From you? From Emma? It's what's best for everyone, Mom. You need to focus on your health, and we need to focus on our daughter. This way, there's no confusion, no false expectations, no drama." "Drama?" The word came out as a whisper. "Sarah, I'm your mother. Emma is my grandchild. You can't just—" "I can, Mom, and I am. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Don't try to contact us. Don't show up at our house. We'll consider it harassment, and we'll take legal action if necessary." Legal action. Against her own mother, for the crime of wanting to love her grandchild. "How can you do this?" I asked, and I hated how broken my voice sounded, how completely defeated. "How can you be so cruel?" "I'm not being cruel," Sarah said, and she actually sounded like she believed it. "I'm being a mother, protecting my child from unhealthy influences. You'd understand if you'd ever put my needs before your own." The irony was devastating. I'd spent 32 years putting her needs before everything, before my own dreams, my own health, my own happiness. And now she accused me of the opposite, rewriting our entire history to cast herself as the victim and me as the villain. "Sarah, please." "Goodbye, Mom. I hope you find the help you need." The line went dead. Just like that. No room for argument, no chance for rebuttal, no opportunity to fight for my place in their lives. Just goodbye. I sat there with the phone in my hand, and I realized something that felt like the final death of hope. I had lost everything. My daughter, my grandchild, my purpose, my reason for existing. All of it. Gone. Erased. As if 32 years of love and sacrifice had never happened. And the worst part? There was nothing I could do about it. Sarah had the power, the control, the right to decide who was allowed in her child's life. And she'd decided that person wasn't me. I looked around my empty house, at the silent rooms that held memories of a life that no longer existed, and I thought, maybe this is how it ends. Not with a fight, not with drama, not with some grand gesture of defiance. Just This. Silence. Emptiness. The slow fade into nothing. But somewhere deep inside, buried under layers of grief and defeat and exhaustion, something else stirred. Something small. Something I barely recognized because it had been dormant for so long. It wasn't hope. Hope had died somewhere between the grocery store confrontation and the Christmas Eve vigil outside her house. No, this was something different. Something quieter, but stronger. It was the faint, barely audible whisper of a woman who'd survived worse than this, who'd raised a child alone, who'd rebuilt her life after divorce, who'd faced a devastating medical diagnosis without falling apart completely. It was the voice of the girl in those old photographs, the one with dreams and courage, and a future that had nothing to do with earning love from people who'd already decided she wasn't worth keeping. It was the sound of something I'd thought was dead, but had only been sleeping. It was my will to survive, not for Sarah, not for Emma, not for anyone but myself, and it whispered, "You're not done yet." The woman who woke up the morning after Sarah's final rejection was not the same woman who'd gone to bed. Something fundamental had shifted during the night, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface of my consciousness. I didn't feel better. I didn't feel hopeful. I certainly didn't feel healed, but I felt different, clearer somehow, as if the fog of grief that had been clouding my vision for months had finally begun to lift, revealing a landscape I'd forgotten existed. I made coffee that morning with hands that still trembled, but I noticed something. I wasn't crying. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I moved through my morning routine without tears blurring my vision. Not because the pain was gone, but because I'd simply run out of tears to shed. I'd cried myself dry, and what remained was something harder, something that didn't dissolve in salt water and sorrow. I sat at my kitchen table with that coffee, too bitter because I'd forgotten to add sugar, but I drank it anyway. And I did something I hadn't done in a very long time. I thought about myself, not as Sarah's mother, not as Emma's rejected grandmother, not as a sick woman whose illness had become her defining characteristic. Just myself, Diana. The person I'd been before all the labels, before all the roles I'd tried so desperately to fulfill. Who was I, stripped of all those identities that had been taken from me? I didn't know. And that realization, instead of terrifying me as it might have done before, felt oddly liberating. If I didn't know who I was anymore, that meant I could decide. I could choose. I started small. I took a shower. A real shower, not the quick, perfunctory rinse I'd been giving myself when I could barely muster the energy to stand. I washed my hair properly, conditioned it, even took the time to moisturize my skin afterward. Simple acts of self-care that I'd been neglecting, because when you're dying inside, it's hard to care about the outside. I looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. Not just glanced and turned away from the evidence of my deterioration. Yes, I looked older. Yes, my illness had left marks on my face, in the shadows under my eyes, in the way my skin seemed to hang a little looser on my bones. But I was still here, still breathing, still capable of more than just existing in my grief. I remembered something my mother had told me, years ago, when my husband had left and I'd thought my world was ending. "Diana," she'd said, holding my face in her weathered hands, "you are more than what they see. You are more than what they make you feel. And when they're done taking from you, you'll discover that they never had access to the parts that truly matter." At the time, I'd thought she was just being kind, saying the sorts of things mothers say to comfort daughters in pain. But standing there in my bathroom, looking at a woman who'd survived betrayal upon betrayal, I began to understand what she'd meant. Sarah had taken so much from me, my sense of purpose, my joy, my hope for the future, my place in her life and Emma's. But she hadn't taken everything. She couldn't. Because some parts of me existed independent of her, existed before her, would continue to exist after her. I just had to remember how to find them. I went through my house that day, really seeing it for the first time in months. It was more than just the place where I'd been abandoned. It was mine, bought with money I'd earned, maintained with effort I'd expended, filled with items I'd chosen. Sarah's rejection hadn't changed that. This space belonged to me, and I'd been letting it become a mausoleum instead of a home. I started cleaning, Not the desperate, manic cleaning of someone trying to distract themselves from pain, but methodical, purposeful cleaning. I opened windows that had been closed for months, letting in fresh air that smelled of earth and possibility. I washed dishes that had been piling up in the sink, each one a small victory over the inertia of depression. I took down the photographs of Sarah that had been tormenting me from every wall. Not in anger. I was past anger. Or maybe I'd moved through it into something else entirely. I just didn't need to see her face everywhere I looked. Didn't need the constant reminder of what I'd lost. I packed them carefully in a box and put them in the closet. Not thrown away, not destroyed, just set aside. In their place, I hung nothing. The empty walls felt appropriate, like blank pages waiting for a new story. The letter I'd written to Emma still sat on my kitchen table, a ghost of the grandmother I'd wanted to be. I picked it up, read it one more time, and felt something unexpected. Embarrassment. Not at the love it expressed, that was real and valid, but at the desperate, pleading tone, the way it positioned me as a victim, as someone defined entirely by what had been done to me rather than what I might still do. I tore it up, slowly, deliberately, reducing my self-pity to confetti. If Emma ever wanted to know me, wanted to understand who I was, she wouldn't need a letter written in my darkest moment. She'd need something else entirely, something I wasn't ready to give yet, but maybe someday would be. I started taking walks. My doctor had recommended gentle exercise, but I'd been too depressed to even consider it. Now, though, movement felt necessary. Each step was a declaration. I'm still here. I still exist. I still have the right to take up space in this world. The neighborhood looked different somehow. Or maybe I was different, seeing it with eyes that weren't constantly blurred by tears. I noticed things I'd overlooked before. The way morning light caught in frost on winter grass, the elderly man 3 houses down who fed stray cats every evening, the young mother struggling with a stroller who could probably use a hand but was too proud to ask. I started helping her. Just small things, holding doors, offering to carry bags when I saw her at the store, watching her toddler for a moment while she loaded groceries into her car. Her name was Jennifer, and she reminded me of myself at that age. Exhausted, overwhelmed, trying so hard to do everything right. She didn't know my story, didn't know I was a mother who'd been rejected by her own child. To her, I was just Diana, the kind older woman who lived down the street. And being just Diana, without all the weight of my failures and losses, felt surprisingly good. I also started attending a support group at the community center. Not for abandoned mothers. I wasn't ready for that level of specificity, but for people dealing with chronic illness. The neurological condition was still progressing, still causing dizzy spells and tremors and all the physical manifestations of a body that wasn't cooperating with my will to function normally. But I was learning to live with it, learning that illness didn't have to mean incapacity. The others in the group understood. They knew what it was like to have your body betray you, to lose abilities you'd taken for granted, to fear a future that looked increasingly uncertain. We shared strategies for managing symptoms, recommendations for doctors and medications, but more importantly, we shared something else, the understanding that we were more than our diagnoses. One woman, Margaret, was in her 60s and had been dealing with her condition for 15 years. She was funny, sharp, still working part-time and traveling when she could. She took me aside after one meeting. "You've got that look," she said, studying my face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read pain in others. "What look?" "The look of someone who's been made to feel like their illness makes them unworthy of love." She smiled, but it was sad. "Let me guess. Family pulled away when you needed them most?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Their loss," Margaret said firmly. "Their loss, and eventually they'll realize it. But by then, you'll have built a life that doesn't need them in it. And that's the best revenge, not needing them anymore." Revenge. I'd been thinking about that word a lot lately. Not in the dramatic sense. I wasn't planning to do anything to hurt Sarah or to force my way into Emma's life. But there was a quieter kind of justice I could pursue. The justice of surviving. Of thriving even. Of proving that my worth wasn't determined by my daughter's judgment of me. I started keeping a journal. Not about Sarah. Not about my pain. But about me. What I was feeling, yes, but also what I was noticing, learning, becoming. I wrote about the books I was reading. I'd rediscovered the library, that sanctuary of free knowledge and quiet space. I wrote about the small victories of managing my illness. I wrote about the person I was slowly, painfully, deliberately becoming. I wrote, I spent 32 years believing my value came from being needed. Now I'm learning that maybe my value comes from being me. Not a perfect me, not a healthy me, not even a particularly happy me. Just me, flawed, sick, abandoned, but still here, still breathing, still capable of more than I thought. One evening in late January, I was sitting in my living room, cleaner now, more organized, the air fresher from windows I opened regularly, when I realized I'd gone an entire day without thinking about Sarah. Not obsessively anyway. She'd crossed my mind, of course, but not as the consuming presence she'd been for months. She was becoming smaller, less central to my existence. It should have felt like another loss. Instead, it felt like freedom. I thought about Sarah's accusation that I'd made her responsible for my happiness. Maybe there had been truth in that. Maybe I had poured so much of myself into being her mother that I'd forgotten how to be anything else. Maybe my neediness hadn't been about my illness at all, but about a lifetime of defining myself through someone else. But I wasn't that woman anymore. That woman had been destroyed, dismantled piece by rejection and cruelty and abandonment. What was emerging from the ruins wasn't someone dependent on Sarah's love for validation. It was someone who was learning, slowly and painfully, to validate herself. I looked at my trembling hands, at the physical evidence of my deteriorating condition, and I made a decision. This illness might take my coordination, might take my balance, might eventually take my independence, but it wouldn't take my dignity. It wouldn't take my right to exist on my own terms. It wouldn't take the essential core of who I was beneath all the roles I'd played. I stood up, walked to my bedroom, and pulled out the box of old photographs I'd been looking at months ago. The ones of young Diana, before motherhood, before marriage, before all the compromises and sacrifices that had seemed so necessary at the time. That girl was still in here somewhere, buried under years of disappointment and duty, but still present, still waiting, and I was going to find her again. Not for Sarah, not for Emma, not for anyone who'd decided I wasn't worth keeping. For me, because I was discovering something Sarah would never understand. The most powerful act of defiance isn't fighting back. It's refusing to let someone else's cruelty define you. It's standing up, dusting yourself off, and choosing to live, really live, despite everything they've done to break you. I wasn't broken, not anymore. I was something else entirely. I was becoming free. February brought unexpected warmth, an early thaw that made the world feel like it was waking up from a long sleep. I felt it too. This sense of emergence, of something dormant finally stirring to life. I had been taking my walks regularly now, and on one of those walks, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. The community center where I attended my support group had posted a flyer about volunteer opportunities. One in particular caught my eye. They needed someone to help organize their senior services program, coordinating activities and support for elderly residents who were isolated or struggling, people like I had been, people who needed someone to see them, to value them, to remind them they still mattered. I stood there looking at that flyer for a long time, my breath creating small clouds in the cool air. This wasn't something I'd ever imagined doing. I'd spent my entire adult life focused on Sarah, on being the perfect mother, on sacrificing everything for someone who'd ultimately decided I was disposable. The idea of channeling that same energy into helping strangers felt both terrifying and strangely right. I took down the phone number. That evening, I did something else I hadn't done in months. I called someone first. Not Sarah. I was done chasing someone who'd made it clear they didn't want to be caught. I called Margaret from the support group. Diana. Her warm voice filled the line. I was just thinking about you. How are you doing? The simple question, asked with genuine interest, made my throat tighten. Better, I said, and realized it was true. Actually, I wanted to ask your advice about something. I told her about the volunteer position, about my hesitation, about my fear that I was still too broken to be useful to anyone else. Margaret laughed, not mockingly, but with the understanding of someone who'd walked this path before. Oh, honey, you think you need to be healed before you can help others? That's backwards. Sometimes helping others is what heals you. Besides, she added, her voice softening, you've got experience now. You know what it feels like to be invisible, to be discarded. That makes you exactly the person who can see others when no one else does. Her words settled into my chest like a warm stone. She was right. Everything I'd suffered, everything I'd lost, it didn't have to be meaningless. It could be transformed into something else. Not erased, not forgotten, but repurposed. I applied for the position the next day. While I waited to hear back, I started making other changes. Small ones, but deliberate. I began cooking real meals again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I tried new recipes, experimented with flavors, rediscovered the pleasure of creating something nourishing. Sometimes I invited Jennifer and her toddler over for lunch. Sometimes I ate alone. Both felt okay. I also started going through my finances with a clarity I hadn't had in months. Sarah's rejection had made me realize something important. I needed to be prepared to take care of myself, to have resources that weren't dependent on anyone else's goodwill. I reviewed my modest savings, created a budget that accounted for my medical expenses, looked into what support services were available for people with my condition. I wasn't wealthy. I'd never be wealthy. But I had enough to survive, enough to maintain my independence, enough to prove that I didn't need Sarah's presence or Emma's love to have a life worth living. The community center called me on a Wednesday afternoon. They wanted to meet with me to discuss the volunteer position. The interview was scheduled for Friday. I prepared for it the way I used to prepare for important events when I still believed my life had purpose beyond serving others. I chose my clothes carefully. Nothing fancy, but clean and presentable, the kind of outfit that said I took myself seriously even if others didn't. I practiced what I might say, how I might explain my qualifications without revealing too much about why I suddenly had so much time available, why a woman my age was seeking volunteer work instead of spending time with family. The interview itself was conducted by a kind woman named Patricia, who ran the senior services program. She was in her 50s with warm brown eyes and the efficient manner of someone who'd learned to accomplish much with limited resources. "Tell me about yourself, Diana," she said, settling into her chair with a notepad. And I did. But not the way I would have a few months ago. I didn't define myself through my relationship with Sarah, didn't present myself as primarily a mother or grandmother. Instead, I talked about my work experience, my organizational skills, my understanding of what it meant to need support and not know how to ask for it. "I've been through some difficult times recently," I said carefully. "Health issues, personal losses. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like the world has moved on without you. I think that experience could help me connect with the people who need this program most." Patricia studied me for a moment, and I saw recognition in her eyes. Not of my specific story, but of the type of story. She'd heard it before, in different variations. She understood. "When can you start?" she asked. Just like that, I had purpose again. Not the purpose I'd thought I needed, being essential to Sarah, being grandmother to Emma, but something different, something that belonged to me alone. I started the following Monday. The work was simple but meaningful, making phone calls to isolated seniors, organizing group activities, coordinating transportation to medical appointments for those who needed it. I was doing for others what no one had been willing to do for me, and in helping them, I found something unexpected. I wasn't just giving, I was receiving. Their stories, their resilience, their refusal to let age or illness or loneliness define them completely. It all fed something in me that had been starving. There was Edward, 83, whose children lived across the country and rarely called. He reminded me that I wasn't the only parent who'd been forgotten by the people they'd raised. There was Ruth, 75, whose husband had left her for a younger woman after 50 years of marriage. She taught me that betrayal could happen at any age, that you could rebuild even when you thought it was too late. There was James, 68, whose Parkinson's made him shake so badly he could barely hold a coffee cup. He showed me that physical limitations didn't have to mean the end of joy, of contribution. of mattering. They became my community. Not a replacement for the family I'd lost, but something different. Something chosen rather than biological. Something based on mutual respect and shared understanding rather than obligation or guilt. One evening in early March, as I was organizing files at the community center, Patricia came to find me. "Diana, I wanted to let you know, we've received some incredible feedback about your work. The seniors you've been helping, they talk about you. They say you really see them, really listen. That's rare." The praise made me uncomfortable in the best way. I wasn't used to being valued for something beyond my relationship to Sarah. "They see me too," I said quietly. "That's what makes it work." Patricia nodded. "I also wanted to ask if you'd be interested in expanding your role. We're planning a community event for April, celebrating our senior community members. We need someone to help organize it, to make sure people feel honored, not just attended to. Would you consider it? An event, a celebration, a public acknowledgement of people's worth and contributions. Everything I'd wanted for myself, I could now help create for others." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'd love to." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd cried so many tears, where I'd written that desperate letter to Emma, where I'd eaten lonely meals and contemplated my worthlessness. And I wrote something different. A list. Not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd gained. "I have purpose that belongs to me alone," I wrote. "I have dignity that no one gave me and therefore no one can take away. I have a community of people who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. I have proven to myself that I can survive the unsurvivable. I have learned that being needed isn't the same as being valued, and being alone isn't the same as being lonely." I paused, pen hovering over paper, and then added one more line. "I have become someone Sarah wouldn't recognize, and that's exactly who I needed to be." The event planning consumed my days in the best possible way. I coordinated with local businesses for donations, arranged for music and food, created a program that would highlight each senior's story and contributions. I wanted it to be perfect, not for me, but for them. For people who'd been overlooked and undervalued and forgotten, just like I had been. As April approached, I found myself thinking about Sarah less and less. When I did think about her, it was with a strange detachment, as if she was someone I'd known in another life. The sharp pain had dulled to a distant ache, present but no longer debilitating. I wondered if she thought about me. If she ever looked at Emma and felt a twinge of guilt about the grandmother she'd erased from her daughter's life. If she'd told herself some story that made her cruelty seem justified, necessary even. It didn't matter. Not anymore. 1 week before the event, something unexpected happened. I was at the grocery store, the same one where Sarah had rejected me so publicly months ago, when I saw Mark. He was alone, looking tired, pushing a cart filled with diapers and baby formula. Our eyes met. He froze, clearly trying to decide whether to acknowledge me or pretend he hadn't seen me. I made the decision for him. I walked over, my head high, my hands steady despite my condition. "Hello, Mark," I said calmly. He shifted uncomfortably. "Diana. Hi. How are you?" "I'm well, thank you." And I meant it. I was well. Not perfectly healthy, not without struggles, but fundamentally okay in ways that had nothing to do with physical condition. He glanced at my cart, probably looking for signs of decline or desperation. Instead, he saw fresh vegetables, good bread, ingredients for a life being lived rather than endured. That's good." He paused, then added quietly, "Sarah asks about you sometimes." "Does she?" I kept my voice neutral, uninterested. "That's nice." The lack of desperation in my response seemed to unsettle him more than tears would have. This wasn't the broken woman he'd last seen, the one who'd begged for scraps of inclusion. "How's Emma?" I asked, and my voice was steady. I could ask about my granddaughter without falling apart. I could acknowledge her existence without needing to be part of it. "She's good. Growing fast." He hesitated. "Look, Diana, about everything that happened. It's fine, Mark." I cut him off gently, but firmly. Sarah made her choice. I've made mine. We're all moving forward. I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. This wasn't how he'd expected this encounter to go. "You look different," he said finally. I smiled. I am different. I walked away from him without looking back, feeling his eyes on me as I moved through the store with purpose and confidence. I wondered if he'd tell Sarah about this encounter, about the woman who no longer seemed to need them. I hoped he would, because the best response to being discarded isn't begging to be taken back. It's building a life so full, so meaningful, so complete that you become proof of their loss rather than their victim. The calm I felt wasn't the numbness of depression or the peace of acceptance. It was something else entirely. It was the quiet confidence of someone who'd been knocked down, had gotten back up, and was now standing on solid ground. The storm was coming. I could feel it. But this time, I wouldn't be swept away by it. This time, I would be the storm. The day of the community event arrived with perfect spring weather. Warm sunshine, clear skies, the kind of day that feels like a promise. I arrived at the community center early, my hands surprisingly steady as I arranged tables and checked last-minute details. The room looked beautiful. We'd decorated it simply but warmly, with flowers donated by a local shop and photographs of each senior we were honoring displayed on a memory wall. Each photo was accompanied by a brief story about their contributions, their resilience, their worth. I'd written most of those stories myself, after hours of interviews where I'd listened to lives that mattered, lives that deserved to be celebrated. People started arriving around noon. The seniors came first, many of them dressed in their finest clothes, their faces showing a mixture of pride and disbelief that someone was making a fuss over them. Edward wore a suit that smelled faintly of mothballs. Ruth had her hair done specially. James brought his wife, who beamed at everyone with joy at seeing her husband honored. Then came the families, children and grandchildren and friends who'd been invited to celebrate these remarkable people. The room filled with conversation and laughter, with the sound of connections being made and strengthened. I moved through it all, greeting people, making sure everyone felt welcome, checking that the refreshments were adequate and the program would run smoothly. Patricia kept catching my eye and smiling, clearly pleased with how everything was coming together. I was standing near the entrance directing a latecomer to the refreshment table when I felt it, that prickle of awareness that tells you someone's watching you. I turned, and my breath caught. Sarah stood in the doorway, holding Emma. She looked different from the last time I'd seen her. Softer somehow, more tired. Emma was bigger now, 3 months old, with wispy blonde hair and Sarah's eyes. My granddaughter. Right there. Real. For a moment, the old pain tried to resurface, tried to remind me of everything I'd lost. But I pushed it down with the strength I'd been building over these past months. Sarah's eyes found mine across the room. I watched her face shift through a series of emotions. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been guilt. She clearly hadn't expected to see me here. I could have hidden, could have slipped into the back room and avoided the confrontation. The old Diana would have done exactly that, would have prioritized Sarah's comfort over her own presence. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and walked toward her. "Sarah," I said when I reached her, my voice calm and measured. "What are you doing here?" She shifted Emma in her arms, using the baby as both shield and excuse. "Mark's aunt is being honored today, Ruth Fletcher. We came to support her." She paused, then added defensively, "I didn't know you'd be here." "Why would you?" I said simply. "You've made it clear you don't want to know anything about my life." People were starting to notice our interaction, sensing the tension beneath the polite words. Sarah noticed, too, her face flushing. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. "Somewhere private?" I glanced at Patricia, who was watching with concern. I gave her a subtle nod, "Everything's fine," and then led Sarah to a small office off the main room. Once inside, with the door closed, Sarah seemed less certain. She looked around at the neat desk, the files organized with my handwriting on the labels, the photos pinned to a bulletin board. Me with Edward, me with Ruth, me with the other seniors I'd been helping. "You work here?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Volunteer," I corrected. "I coordinate the senior services program." "Since when?" "Since I decided to stop waiting for my daughter to decide I was worth loving, and started finding purpose elsewhere." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. They were true. Sarah flinched. Emma, sensing her mother's tension, started to fuss. Sarah bounced her automatically, the practiced motion of a new mother. "Mom, she started, then stopped. "You look different." "I am different," I said, echoing what I'd told Mark. I had to be. "The woman you discarded didn't survive what you put her through. What emerged is someone else entirely." "That's not fair," Sarah protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "I was protecting myself, protecting my family." "From what?" I interrupted. "From a sick woman who loved you? From a mother who wanted to be part of her grandchild's life? What terrible threat did I pose that required such complete rejection?" Emma's fussing turned to crying. Sarah tried to soothe her, but the baby was having none of it. Without thinking, I reached out. "May I?" Sarah hesitated, then, surprising both of us, handed Emma over. The moment my granddaughter settled into my arms, something ancient and powerful stirred in my chest. She was so small, so perfect, so completely innocent of the cruelty that had kept us apart. I looked down at her tear-stained face and felt, not the desperate love I'd imagined, but something clearer, cleaner, recognition. This was my granddaughter, yes, but she was also her own person, beginning her own story. Emma stopped crying almost immediately, her blue eyes focusing on my face with infant curiosity. "She likes you," Sarah said softly, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard in years. Vulnerability. "Babies usually do," I said, not looking at Sarah, keeping my attention on Emma. "They haven't learned yet that some people are supposed to be excluded from love." The silence that followed was heavy. I could feel Sarah watching me, could sense her struggling with something she couldn't quite articulate. "I was scared," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you got sick, when I realized you might need me, might depend on me, I panicked. I thought if I let you in, you'd consume everything. My time, my energy, my life with Mark and the baby. I thought I had to choose between being your daughter and being Emma's mother." I looked up at her then, this woman I'd raised, and saw her clearly for perhaps the first time. She wasn't evil. She wasn't even particularly cruel by nature. She was just afraid. Selfish, yes, but also afraid. Afraid of being needed. Afraid of sacrificing the life she'd built. Afraid of becoming what I had been. Someone who gave everything and ended up with nothing. "So you chose to erase me completely," I said. "Rather than setting healthy boundaries, rather than figuring out how to love me while also living your life, you decided the safest option was to pretend I didn't exist." "I'm sorry," she whispered, and tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was cruel. I justified it by telling myself I was protecting Emma, but really, I was just protecting myself from having to deal with uncomfortable feelings. The apology I'd dreamed of for months was finally here, but it felt different than I'd imagined. Not like vindication, not like victory, just sad. Sad that it had taken this long. Sad that so much damage had been done. Sad that my daughter had had to learn the hard way that love isn't a zero-sum game. Emma made a soft cooing sound in my arms, her tiny hand grasping my finger with surprising strength. "I've missed so much," Sarah continued, watching Emma with me. 3 months of her life, and I've been so consumed with anxiety and sleepless nights and trying to be the perfect mother that I forgot. She stopped, swallowing hard. I forgot that I had a mother too, one who already knew how hard this was, who could have helped me, who wanted to help me. "Yes," I said simply. "You did forget that. Can you forgive me?" She looked at me with desperate hope. "Can we start over?" I looked down at Emma, then back at my daughter. The old Diana would have said yes immediately, would have been so grateful for the reconciliation that she'd accept any terms, overlook any hurt, just to have her daughter back. But I wasn't the old Diana anymore. "I don't know," I said honestly. "You didn't just hurt me, Sarah. You tried to destroy me. You abandoned me when I was sick and scared and alone. You threatened me with legal action for wanting to know my grandchild. You made me feel worthless, invisible, like my 32 years of loving you counted for nothing." "I know," she sobbed. "I know I did, and I hate myself for it." "That's not my problem," I said, but not unkindly. "Whether you hate yourself or forgive yourself, that's your journey. Mine is different now." "What does that mean?" Fear crept into her voice. I handed Emma back to her, careful to support the baby's head the way I'd once supported hers, decades ago. It means I'm not the same woman who needed you to define her worth. I've built a life, a good life, without you. I have purpose, community, dignity. I'm helping people who value what I have to offer. I gestured toward the door, toward the celebration happening beyond it. I matter here, not because I'm someone's mother or grandmother, but because of who I am. So you don't want me in your life anymore? Sarah's voice broke. I didn't say that. I met her eyes steadily. But if you want to be in my life, it will be on different terms. I won't chase you anymore. I won't beg for scraps of your attention. I won't make myself small to fit into whatever space you're willing to give me. If you want a relationship with me, you'll have to do the work. You'll have to show up, consistently, respectfully, genuinely. I will, she said quickly. I promise, I will. We'll see, I said. Promises are easy. Actions are what matter. There was a soft knock on the door. Patricia poked her head in. Diana? We're ready to start the program whenever you are. I nodded. I'll be right there. I looked at Sarah one more time. You're welcome to stay for the event. Ruth would probably love to see you, but I need to get back to work. These people are counting on me, and I don't disappoint people who trust me. The implication was clear. Unlike you. Sarah caught it, wincing, but she nodded. Okay, I'll call you? Later this week? If you want to, I said. But Sarah, if you call, make sure it's because you genuinely want to rebuild our relationship, not because you feel guilty or obligated. I don't need pity. I need respect. I walked out of that office with my head high, leaving my daughter to process everything that had just happened. As I returned to the celebration, I felt the eyes of the room on me, people who'd witnessed the reunion, who'd seen me face my daughter without crumbling. Edward caught my eye and gave me a subtle thumbs up. Ruth squeezed my hand as I passed. Patricia whispered, You okay? I'm perfect, I said, and meant it. The program began, and I stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of people who'd become my chosen family. In the back of the room, I could see Sarah holding Emma, watching me with what looked like new eyes. Let her watch, I thought. Let her see who I became when she left me for dead. Let her see that I didn't just survive. I flourished. Sarah did call. 3 days later, then again the following week, and the week after that. At first I could hear the guilt driving her, the desperate need to fix what she'd broken, to ease her conscience, to transform herself from villain to prodigal daughter in our story. But I didn't make it easy for her. I didn't pretend that a few phone calls could erase months of cruelty. I answered when I had time, ended conversations when I had other commitments, and refused to rearrange my life around her convenience. I'm busy Tuesday, I'd say when she suggested getting together. I have my support group, and then I'm helping Edward organize his medications. Who's Edward? She'd ask, confusion in her voice. A friend, I'd respond simply, not elaborating. Let her wonder. Let her realize that my world had expanded beyond her, that I had relationships and responsibilities that had nothing to do with her. The first time she actually came to visit, 2 weeks after the community center event, I could see the shock on her face when she walked into my house. It was different from the last time she'd been here. Cleaner, yes, but more than that, it was alive. There were fresh flowers on the kitchen table, books stacked on the coffee table with bookmarks indicating active reading, a calendar on the wall filled with appointments and activities. This wasn't the home of a woman waiting to die. This was the home of someone living. The place looks great, Mom, she said, and I heard the unspoken question, How did you do this without me? Thank you, I replied. I've been taking care of it, taking care of myself. She'd brought Emma, of course. My granddaughter was growing fast, becoming more alert, more present. When Sarah asked if I wanted to hold her, I said yes, but casually, not desperately. I held Emma with the comfortable confidence of someone who'd raised a child, not the frantic hunger of someone being denied access. You're so good with her, Sarah observed, watching us. I had practice, I said mildly. I raised you, remember? The reminder hung in the air, a gentle but firm acknowledgement that I hadn't suddenly developed these skills, that I'd always been capable, always been worthy of being part of Emma's life. Over the following months, Sarah tried. I'll give her that. She called regularly, invited me to visit, brought Emma by for short trips. But I noticed something that I'm not sure she realized. She was auditioning, trying to prove she deserved to be in my life, working to earn back the trust she'd shattered. The dynamic had shifted completely. I was no longer the supplicant begging for scraps of her attention. She was the one seeking approval, wondering if she'd done enough, if I'd really forgiven her. I hadn't. Not completely. Maybe I never would. But I was learning that forgiveness wasn't a prerequisite for moving forward. I could acknowledge what she'd done, hold her accountable for the damage, and still choose to build something new if she proved herself worthy of the effort. One afternoon in June, Sarah arrived looking troubled. Emma was with Mark's mother. This was clearly meant to be a serious conversation. "Mom, I need to tell you something," she began, settling onto my couch with the nervous energy of someone about to make a confession. "I'm listening," I said, not rushing to fill the silence or make her more comfortable. "I've been seeing a therapist since the community center event." She twisted her hands together. "I told her everything, about how I treated you, about the abandonment, about my fears and justifications. And she helped me understand something." She paused, and I waited. "I was repeating a pattern," Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. "When I was little, after Dad left, you were so consumed with surviving, with making sure we had what we needed, that I felt invisible sometimes. Not unloved, but secondary. Like I was a responsibility rather than a person you enjoyed." The words stung, but I forced myself to listen. "I know you were doing your best," she added quickly. "I know now how hard you worked, how much you sacrificed. But that little girl inside me, she was still angry about it. And when you got sick, when you started needing me, all that old resentment came flooding back. It was like that little girl was screaming, 'Why should I take care of you when you didn't really see me?' I sat with this for a moment, processing. "So you punished me for sins you thought I'd committed when you were a child?" "Yes," she whispered. "I know it's not fair. I know it's not rational, but that's what I was doing. And I'm so sorry." I thought about those early years. The exhaustion, the endless working, the constant worry about money and future and whether I was doing enough. Had I been emotionally available? Had I made Sarah feel seen and valued? Or had I been so focused on survival that I'd missed the quieter needs of a child's heart? Maybe both were true. Maybe I'd been both a devoted mother and an imperfect one. Maybe Sarah's feelings and my intentions could coexist without one canceling out the other. "Thank you for telling me this," I said finally. "It helps me understand, even if it doesn't excuse what you did." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking for excuses. I'm trying to be honest. And I'm trying to do better. With you and with Emma. I don't want to repeat the same patterns. Don't want her to grow up feeling unseen the way I sometimes did, or abandoned the way I made you feel." There was something in her voice. Genuine remorse. Yes, but also genuine growth. She wasn't just apologizing to make herself feel better. She was actually looking at herself, at her failings, and trying to change. "Then we'll both do better," I said. "We'll both learn from our mistakes and build something new, not pretending the past didn't happen, but not letting it define everything either." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Do you think we can? Really?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. Not just giving her the answer she wanted to hear. "I think we can build something," I said carefully. "It won't be what we had before. That's gone. And honestly, maybe it needed to be. It wasn't healthy. You're right about that. I made you my entire world, and that was too much pressure for anyone to carry. And you responded by trying to erase me completely, which was cruel but came from a real place of fear." I leaned forward, making sure she heard every word. "But we can build something better. Something where I'm a full person with my own life, and you're a full person with yours, and we choose to be part of each other's lives without consuming each other. Where I can love you and Emma without needing you to be my everything. Where you can love me without feeling suffocated by my needs." "I'd like that," she said softly. "More than anything." The months that followed weren't perfect. Sarah still sometimes slipped into old patterns, canceling plans when something more convenient came up, forgetting to call when she said she would, and I still sometimes felt the old hurt rising up, the old fear that she'd abandon me again. But we were both trying, and more importantly, I had my own life to fall back on. My volunteer work at the community center had expanded. I was now coordinating programs for 3 locations. Edward, Ruth, James, and the others had become genuine friends, people I cared about and who cared about me. Jennifer down the street brought her daughter over for lunch every Tuesday. I had built a community, a purpose, a life that existed independent of Sarah's presence or absence in it, and that made all the difference. One evening in September, almost a year after Sarah's cruel abandonment, I was sitting in my backyard watching the sunset when I heard a car pull up. Sarah emerged holding Emma, who was nearly 9 months old now and babbling with the enthusiasm of a child discovering language. "Surprise visit?" I asked, smiling. "Kind of," Sarah said, but there was something different in her expression. "Mom, I wanted to ask you something. Mark's parents are going out of town next weekend, and we were wondering, would you be willing to watch Emma? Just for Saturday afternoon? Maybe 4 hours?" It was a small thing, really. Babysitting. Something grandmothers do all the time, but we both knew what it represented. Trust. The belief that I wouldn't just be a good grandmother to Emma, but a safe one. The acknowledgement that my presence in Emma's life was wanted, valuable, important. "I'd love to," I said, and watched Sarah's shoulders relax with relief. That Saturday, as I watched Emma explore my living room with fearless curiosity, as I sang her the same silly songs I'd once sung to Sarah, as I felt her tiny hand grab my finger with complete trust, I realized something profound. This wasn't the relationship I'd originally wanted. I'd dreamed of being the grandmother who was there from the beginning, who never missed a milestone, who was woven into the fabric of Emma's daily life. Instead, I was the grandmother who'd survived abandonment and rebuilt herself, who'd found her own worth when others denied it, who'd learned that love doesn't require losing yourself, that being needed isn't the same as being valued, that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is build a life so full that those who left you realize what they've lost. Emma looked up at me with Sarah's eyes and gave me a gummy smile, drool running down her chin. I wiped it away gently, kissed her forehead, and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Complete. Not because Sarah had come back, not because I was finally allowed to be a grandmother, but because I'd discovered that my completeness had never depended on their approval in the first place. I was enough. I had always been enough. I just had to lose everything to finally see it. Sarah came to pick up Emma right on time, and I handed over my granddaughter with detailed notes about her nap and feeding, acting every bit the competent grandmother I'd always been capable of being. "Thank you, Mom," Sarah said, and the gratitude in her voice was genuine. "Really? This means everything." "You're welcome," I replied. Then, because I'd learned to say what needed to be said, "But Sarah, remember that this isn't about you giving me permission to be Emma's grandmother. It's about me choosing to be part of your lives despite what you did. Don't confuse my generosity with your entitlement." She flinched but nodded. "You're right. I'm still learning how to do this. How to be your daughter without taking you for granted. Keep learning," I said. "And I'll keep being here. Not because I need you, but because I choose you. There's a difference." After they left, I stood on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear children playing, dogs barking, the sounds of ordinary lives being lived. My life was ordinary now too, in the best possible way, no longer defined by abandonment or illness or loss, but by choice, by purpose, by the quiet dignity of a woman who'd been broken and had put herself back together in a shape that was stronger than before. I'd learned that the trees hadn't taken care of me that cold day when everything fell apart. I'd taken care of myself. I'd found the strength to walk out of those woods, to rebuild, to become someone new. And the woman I'd become was someone I actually liked, someone I respected, someone worthy of love, not because others finally recognized it, but because I'd recognized it in myself. Sarah had said that day in the grocery store that I brought that energy, the neediness, the burden, the uncomfortable reminder of mortality and imperfection. She'd been right, in a way. I had brought that energy. But I'd left it in those woods where she'd tried to abandon me. What I brought now was different. I brought wisdom earned through suffering, strength forged in solitude, dignity that no one could take away because I'd given it to myself. I brought the unshakable knowledge that I could survive the unsurvivable, and that was the greatest justice of all.